This is work from Alex Parker et al., and this is from his 2010 report to the Central Valley Board. And in the upper graph and the lower graph from March and May 2009, we don't see very clear trends, but in April 2009, we can see a steadily declining trend in chlorophyll along the entire length of the Sacramento River. And this is independent of any point sources that occur. And I think one of the data gaps that this identifies is that there is something causing the reduction in algae throughout the length of the Sacramento River. And I don't believe that this is thoroughly addressed in the publications by Parker et al. In 2012. It's also relevant to comment that when you look at, say, an average of the three upper stations, the upriver stations on the left, and several downstream stations towards the right of the graph, if you average multiple stations and compare them, of course you'll see a difference, at least in that April 2009 Transect survey. But you lose the information by averaging. You lose the fact that this is a continuum effect. So finally, I'd like to point out that Parker et al. Describe what's happening, or what they believe is happening in the Sacramento River, based on the results of uptake and growth experiments that were conducted in enclosed test samples. And comparing those results with these observations from the environment don't seem to agree very well, at least to me. And it's important to know the uncertainty in extrapolating lab results to field observations and what's really happening in the environment. Finally, I'd like to point out that there's spatial and temporal variability that needs to be considered in this complex system, as I'm sure you've gathered so far by all of this discussion. Finally, this example is from Sassoon Bay, looking at algae versus clams, and this is a figure from the 2011 pulse of the delta, or pulse of the estuary. It's cited below. But as we heard yesterday from Dr. Kimmerer and others, invasive clams are a major driver in the system. By one estimate, they can filter the overlying water column in less than 1 day to 4 days, so there's quite a bit of algae removal. And they alter food web dynamics. So conceptual or empirical models that exclude this driver are highly uncertain in explaining what's going on in the delta. So in summary, and I'd like to recommend that the data used by resource managers as a basis for decisions must minimize uncertainties as best as you can. And one approach to doing this is to use data quality objectives and QA/QC in the planning process for studies, and then a data validation and thorough peer and stakeholder review process after the data is produced. So delta models and resource managers should consider the relative importance, spatial and temporal variability, and the confidence they have in the data. Thank you. Oops. This is forward.
Okay, we'll hear from Susan Paulsen, representing City of Antioch.
All right, and I do have slides. My name is Susan Paulsen. I'm president and senior scientist at Flow Science, and I'm happy to be here and to present testimony on behalf of the City of Antioch. Let's see if I can figure this out. There we go. What I'd like to talk about today is just a little bit of information on the City of Antioch itself, and then I thought I'd talk, to the extent that we can, about the potential impacts of the BDCP project. That is, the City of Antioch and I presented some detailed information at the 2010 flow criteria hearings. But the information about BDCP, as well as a couple of other pieces of information, are new since that period of time, and hopefully will inform the decision making and the discussion that we all have as we go forward. And then I'd like to put that into context and talk about what the delta looked like historically, and the conditions to which the native species in the ecosystem presumably were adapted. and then how that all fits into revisions to water quality criteria, and finally Antioch's requests. The city of Antioch is located about where the red star is shown here. These are two maps. One is from about 1873, before there were some alterations in the delta at that point in time, but minimal compared to what we have now. And you can see, comparing the figure on the left to the figure on the right, which show approximately the same area, how much this system has changed over time. The city of Antioch has been there and has observed these changes. The city has used the delta as its primary freshwater supply since the 1860s, although the amount of time, as we'll discuss, the amount of time when it can take water, the duration of the year when it can take water from the delta has declined steadily over time. The city also is a gateway to the delta and relies on freshwater recreation and a healthy ecosystem as well. So that is a secondary concern. I'd like to talk a little about the BDCP project, and that's a little bit difficult because BDCP is changing, as you know. The city did receive a hard drive from DWR that contained an awful lot of modeling data, calcium and DSM-2 modeling data for the delta, for the alternatives that had been considered before this summer. We did some extensive analysis of what had been called the preliminary proposal at that point in time, and I'd like to show you a few of those results. That preliminary proposal, which I'll refer to, it'll show on the slides as the PP, was a 15,000 CFS capacity diversion. It involved some habitat restoration, and it involved a change in the compliance point for some water quality objectives. Again, the future proposals may differ, but I still think it's informative to look at the past model results as an indicator of some of the changes that we may see with the new proposal when we get those data. The modeling that was done to evaluate the BDCP project evaluated conditions over a 16-year period and evaluated both sea level rise and a variety of alternatives, including this BDCP preliminary proposal. What we see in those model results, and what I'll show you shortly, is that those model results showed significant increases in delta salinity that were a direct result of that BDCP preliminary proposal project. All right, so I have two slides where I'd like to show you some results. Let me orient you here. These show a time series of model results over the 16-year period. It's just broken out into 3 panels, each covering a different range of those 16 years. What you see in blue are the baseline conditions. That is the salinity. This is EC, which is a measure of salinity. The salinity that would occur under current operations for this historical time period. What you see in green, see if I can get my pointer, the green usually comes pretty close to the blue. What you see in green is what the salinity is predicted by the model results to be with sea level rise alone. And the results I'm showing you here are for the early long term with a 15 centimeter sea level rise. There are also results for 45 centimeters. I'm just showing you these as a snapshot. And then what you see in red is the salinity that's predicted to occur at Antioch with the BDCP proposed project, again for the early long term with 15 centimeters of sea level rise. And what you can see, I've added some circles here, some orange circles, and those highlight the time periods where the increase in salinity due to, again, the prior preliminary proposal from BDCP was the greatest. And you can see in some time periods that there is a very significant increase in salinity at Antioch and in the Western Delta. The other point I'd like to make with this slide is that sometimes it's easier to present results as long-term averages or as aggregate results, and that really can mask some of these changes that are very important, certainly for a drinking water supply, but also perhaps ecologically as well. Now, there are other ways to look at these results, and what this slide shows is exactly the same model run, the early long term with 15 centimeters of sea level rise and that earlier preliminary proposal, but aggregated in a different way. And what we've done here is to divide into different year types, so to separate the results out into different year types, and to show them by month of year, so from January to December, and to show the fraction of time in each of those months, aggregated over year types, that water at Antioch's intake would be usable. And we used a salinity threshold that's defined in a contract between Antioch and DWR. It's just below 1,000 microsiemens per centimeter. So these are conditions when Antioch would be able to take water. And what you can see here is that the prior proposed BDCP project didn't have a ton of effect in critical or dry years, but had a very big effect in the late summer and fall months of near normal years and wet years. So for example, here you can see in the month of October in wet years, Antioch, under both the baseline and the sea level rise condition, would be able to take water from its intake about 80% of the time. But with the BDCP proposed project, that fell to below 40%. So that's a loss of about half the time that the city would be able to take water at that intake. And that's a direct result of the increase in salinity at that location. All right, now why does this occur? Well, a few things. Obviously, the BDCP proposed project would take water from the North Delta and, under some of the alternatives, would reduce the amount of water that's flowing out of the Delta. The project operations themselves are also very important. In fact, may even be more important than the size of the project. Another factor was the move of the compliance point from Emmeton to 3 Mile Slough. So most of the, if not all of the BDCP alternatives that we looked at did move this compliance point. And that would require a change, the state board to change the water quality objectives. So the model results did incorporate an anticipated change, or appear to have incorporated an anticipated change in water quality objectives. And the third thing, and this is somewhat counterintuitive in a way, habitat restoration actually can worsen salinity conditions in the Western Delta by changing the amount of water that sloshes in and out of the delta. And if the habitat that is restored is in a location and is designed and operated in such a way that the amount of water sloshing in and out of the delta increases, salinity in the Western Delta can get worse. So what we conclude from this, obviously we're not looking at the final actual BDCP proposal. When we have that, we'll provide additional results. But again, it is still informative. When we looked at, I think it was alternative 4, the prior BDCP 6,000 CFS size alternative, it actually showed salinity increases in the Western Delta that were similar to what we saw for that 15,000 CFS proposed project. And again, it's the actual project operations and the water quality criteria to which the project will be operated that determine the salinity in that area. So based on the information that we have from BDCP to date, the city is very concerned that salinity in the Western Delta will increase. All right, why is that important? Well, you've heard some of this already, and I'll go through it quickly. Historically, the Delta was a different place than it is now. Since the 1850s, a lot of the tidal marsh that you saw in that first slide, that first graphic, has been filled in, and we've created permanent hardened river channels. And that changes the tidal dynamic and the amount of water flowing in and out. We have reservoir storage in upstream watersheds that has a capacity to hold more than 30 million acre feet, which is a lot of water. And we know that water exports from the Delta have been steadily increasing since about the 1950s. When back then we were about 500,000 acre feet per year. The capacity now is about 5 million acre feet per year. So that's gone up. And of course, all of that has an impact on what the Delta looks like. So one of the things that we did was to do some historical research. This is a 1928 report by an engineer named Thomas Means. And I've just typed out a few of the conclusions here. The emphasis is ours, it's added. Historically, Carquinez Strait had marked the approximate boundary between saltwater and freshwater. This study found, looking at decades of historical information, that saltwater may have penetrated as far as Antioch, but only for a few days at a time and only in years of lowest runoff. Things changed in about 1918, and I thought it was interesting to note that the urge of war was one of the reasons that those changes appeared to happen so abruptly in that year. There were heavy plantings of rice and other crops in the Sacramento Valley, and a lot of the water that would have been in the river was diverted for those crops. As a result, saltwater penetrated into the Delta for a much longer time and to a greater distance than had ever been observed prior to that point in time. There's another report that was put together by the state's Department of Public Works, which I believe is the predecessor agency to DWR. This is from 1931. And just a couple of conclusions here. That report also likewise concluded that the dry years of 1917 to 1919, combined with upstream diversions, resulted in, and they called it an invasion of salinity into the delta to a much greater extent and for a longer period of time than had been known before that. From the same report, they evaluated the ability of Antioch to take water at its intake and found that prior to about 1917, conditions were pretty satisfactory. There had been some brackish water during certain periods in late summer and early fall. But after 1917, again, the invasion of salt water happened to a greater degree and lasted for a longer period of time, such that the water at the city's intake was too brackish for domestic use during much longer periods in the summer and fall. DWR also studied this. There's a 1960 report, just excerpted a couple of the statistics from it, which are sort of read off of a graph. DWR estimated at that point in time that Antioch would be able to take fresh water from its intake about 88% of the time under what they called natural conditions. That had declined to about 73% of the time in 1920 and about half the time in 1960. And data that we presented in the flow criteria hearings shows that that's gotten worse since 1960. It's a much smaller fraction of the time currently. There's also new data, I think this was talked about yesterday, looking at the salinity that would result, X2 is a measure of that salinity, the salinity that would result in the Western Delta as a result of unimpaired flows, and then as has actually occurred as a result of project operations. The unimpaired flow numbers are the bold numbers, this X2 asterisk on the right. And you can see those numbers are all between about 72 and 76. But then you can see the actual X2 that occurred from about 72 increasing to around 80 or so in the near-term period. So again, salinity has continued to push farther and farther into the delta over time. What we concluded from viewing the BDCP model results was that the water quality criteria really do govern project operations and determine what salinity in the Western Delta will look like. It's also very important to look at time series data, to look at specific time periods and conditions during, for example, fall and winter months of dry years, as opposed to long-term average measures. And when we look at data, I think it's important to remember what that historical pre-1917 or pre-1918 condition looked like. There have been a lot of data presented here and over the years using different reference periods, the 1920s, the 1930s, the 1960s. And clearly conditions had already been altered significantly at those distinct periods of time. And the reason this is all important, obviously Antioch believes it's important to its drinking water supply and its ability to use water at its intake, but also the delta ecosystem and native species are adapted to a historical freshwater condition. There was salinity variability and sometimes significant variability, but overall the system was much fresher. So, in light of that information, the city would request that salinity should not be allowed to rise above current levels, as defined by current water quality criteria and operations. The city would request that the compliance points, for example, that at Edmonton, should not be moved landward. The city would offer that it has a long-term record at its intake for salinity, and that gauging station could be informative in evaluating conditions within the Western Delta, so the State Water Board may wish to consider use of that location as a gauging point. And then finally, it appears that impacts, and significant impacts, may occur at the city's intake and in the Western Delta generally as a result of the BDCP project. And the city believes that the State Board has a role to play in looking at mitigation for those impacts as we move forward. Thank you.
Do you have any questions for Susan at the moment? Great. Okay, John Herrick from the South Delta Water Agency is the final speaker in this panel.
Thank you, Madam Chair and board members. I feel the need to send a check to the City of Antioch all of a sudden. I apologize for being sort of a non-technical lawyer giving you some information, but I think it's very important what I'm going to say, not just for this phase of the proceedings, but as we move forward in developing the water quality objectives for the eventual plan and the implementation. As we have now, and as assumedly we will have later on, the water quality objectives that we'll have will say how much water or conditions resulting from water will exist in any particular place over any particular time, and you know, when those may adjust over different year types. So the important thing to me is that recent history has shown us that the assumptions we're making in when water is available or what results in water not being available are invalid. And so my brief testimony refers you back to the conditions we faced in 2009, when after two, I call them drought years, I believe one was critically dry and one was dry. The third year started off looking like it was going to be more of the same. So in the beginning of that calendar year now, there was insufficient water in order to meet X2, or fishery flows. Now, conditions change, every year is different. It eventually rained during the proceedings, and so the problem was kind of solved. But I think it's important to note that after only 2 years of drought conditions, which is nothing to laugh at, I mean, 2 years is not a long time, there was insufficient water to meet an objective. So in your development of water quality objectives, if protections of fisheries in the second, third, or fourth year of drought is part of your determination of what is necessary to protect that beneficial use, the fish, then you cannot move forward just assuming the water's there when we now know it won't be there. So as 2009 started, we had insufficient water to meet outflow. Outflow for X2 was approximately 11,400. There's a complicated calculation that determines that. But so when that kicked in, we had 7,000 outflow. And there were some exports. And I'm not here to badmouth exports, but the operation of the projects did not reflect previous estimates of whether or not we could meet water quality standards in those later years. Now, and that's all I have to say really, just in closing, I want to note that during the D-1641 hearings in the 1995 plan development, there were various modeling efforts that went on and examined things. And whether or not you choose to do it in the water rights proceeding, I just want you to note that in that water rights proceeding, there were things that said in the modeling, well, we assume this water will come from somewhere. Now, that may or may not be appropriate in a water rights proceeding if you're ordering somebody to do something, but I don't think it'd be appropriate in the rulemaking proceeding here, which is there water available? So if recent history tells us that after 2 drought years, and whatever the operations were doing those years, you know, that's up for other people to set forth. After 2 years, there wasn't water for fish. Now, if it had not rained in the rest of 2009, there's a whole string of water quality objectives that would not have been met. And the water quality control plan tells us meeting those objectives is the minimum amount necessary to protect the beneficial use. So anyway, with that, those are my comments. I hope they're not too distracting. Thank you.
We have plenty of time for questions before our break.
Well, I guess I'd like to have someone or some ones from the expert panel from yesterday comment on the recommendations that Michael and Mike in particular, but also Cameron, made as to how to enhance what is being done already in terms of monitoring and ecological. No, you have to do it from the mic. I'm sorry. That's the only way people can hear if they're dialing in.
I would just add that think about how the Bay Delta Plan currently describes surveillance requirements and how we can modify that.
And that's obviously not a very small topic, and we just chatted briefly here, not too loudly, amongst ourselves, and decided that we needed to chat a little more before we want to give you an answer as a group. So we will do this over lunch, and we will come back to you hopefully after lunch or perhaps even later with some additional written stuff. But in any case, we value the opportunity, but we need a little more time.
That's good. And yes, sir, Michael.
Chair, could I expand a little on some of the things I said on that? I think the crucial issue here is finding money. And there's not a lot of new money lying around. So the question is going to be, how can we make more efficient use of our existing money? I bet you we've rough estimates, we spend 50 million monitoring the system. So that's a reasonable chunk of change. And the question is, can we make the agencies work more efficiently? There are a couple things that occur to me right off the bat. One is, there's the Ritchie deal on permit monitoring, that there's some room there to figure out, and the board is engaged in an effort to figure out this fall as to how can we be more efficient in what we require people to do. There's some room there, and we can take that money and push it this way. There's the enforcement funds that we could take and push this way. If we think this is as big a priority as we think it is, we should be pushing that way. The other thing is, I think we can't afford to have staffs in each of the agencies separately coming up with science, and we're going to need to somehow figure out how to house the agencies together, but then allow them to give feedback to each of the agencies. And that I think is doable within it's a struggle nationwide, though it's easier in small states than large states in many ways. So, thanks.
So I will wait until afterwards when they come back.
Other board members with questions for this panel? Or?
Sure. You know, again, I'll go back to the existing plan and to speak to Dr. Connor's point, which is well taken. I do have experience in Region 2 and the collaborative monitoring network, which has been set up. It's nice to hear that you think stormwater's fitting in well, because that's a recent development that was 12 years in the making. So that shows that it kind of has that effect of, you know, in space, how matter sort of gloms onto itself, you know, through gravitational. The RMP and its collaborative framework is, you know, can actually provide a way to integrate. And IEP has its own framework that's done that too. I look at the existing Bay Delta plan, and what we're here to talk about is how should we modify it. And there are agency-specific requirements that are laid out. There's a big table. It's got all of these parameters we've been talking about that all kind of are interrelated: turbidity, flow, you know, submerged aquatic vegetation, etc. So, you know, that's a great starting point, because there's a great deal of effort, 50 million plus or minus, into these programs now. So what can the state board do? You know, and I could ask staff, you know, you're probably already thinking about how we're going to modify this portion of the Bay Delta plan called Monitoring and Special Studies Program. It's part of the program of implementation. So, you know, I'd say from a board member's perspective, you know, that's fertile ground in terms of taking the recommendations we're receiving during the workshops and taking existing information and integrating it. Working with Central Valley Regional Board and San Francisco Bay Regional Board to just, you know, compile what we know is being collected, but then also take the recommendations on how to better integrate and just pull it into more of an interdisciplinary kind of framework. So I don't see a big, you know, impediment there. Money is always an impediment. It will, you know, these are the agencies that spend the money for this monitoring need to be brought into this discussion. Lessons learned there, you know, in terms of where the efficiencies can be realized. I'm supportive of the idea of the concept of the chief scientist in terms of, you know, having an organizational structure and leadership that the state board can rely on, you know, to provide these sort of technical answers to the questions of whether our water quality control plan objectives, you know, are achieving the target outcome, you know, as has been articulated. So I think there's a place in the Bay Delta plan for that in terms of just setting forth the framework. So we can support that. It's sort of what I said yesterday. What can we do with the Bay Delta plan to not get in the way of this sort of collaborative approach? I think, you know, a lot of that has to do with just doing some homework at the staff level to pull together, you know, to look at what we have and how we modify it. And then we have the other programs like SWAMP, where we've set forth expected quality management plan, quality assurance, quality control for monitoring. We can dovetail with USGS's well-established quality control to ensure data collected and reported and used for our decisions is of adequate quality. So I don't see that's a big quantum leap either. You know, that's something we actually already do. A lot of what I hear folks, you know, respectfully tell us at the board is stuff we're already doing. And we just have to be clear in this document, in this Bay Delta plan, that we're going to implement it consistently. So I didn't hear a lot of advice there that I would disagree with, you know, in terms of just being a partner in the multi-agency effort to generate good data. And it was interesting, though, and I'll finish on this. You know, as I said yesterday, I'm interested in suggestions from all parties. And some of the suggestions were, you know, what kind of questions that we, the board, should be asking. And it was interesting because all of the questions were, you know, what is the efficacy of our rules? You know, that's a valid question. But I think also we want to look at a broader set of questions. What is the efficacy of DWR's operations? You know, what is the efficacy of the biological opinion suggestions? You know, everything's out there. So, but we want, I mean, I speak for myself, of course, but integration into this process. It's so mature. You know, we just want to integrate into it. But the regional board system and the state board system has experience in encouraging this sort of coordination that was discussed today on this panel. And I would just reinforce that to staff, you know, that's something where we're going to get a lot of bang for the buck. Okay, thanks.
This morning, Steve, you speak for all of us. That was good. Just a couple of thoughts. One is I want to thank the panel. I thought it was great. There were a few quotes of the day in there I won't repeat, but Jeepers is now anybody else who can work Jeepers into their comments will get extra credit points on me listening intently what they have to say. I always love listening to you, Michael. Thank you very much. And all of you, thank you for addressing the question we asked. And I very much liked what Steve had to say, but also there's no perfect way to respond to something like this, and I think the workshops are great because they do give you some flexibility. But my reminder would be that it is actually most helpful, as many of you did, to give us suggestions on what we can do, as Steve said, in the context of the monitoring point, but it's true of all, that there's something that we do have to do here, and we want to figure out how to do the most thoughtful thing, the most useful thing that we can. And so just speaking for myself, as Steve just spoke for himself, but perhaps I speak for others, it is most helpful if people give us concrete suggestions to consider. And it's also most helpful to acknowledge the valid points of others and other beneficial uses. I have to say I have a bias about finding it, exasperating is too strong a word, and I understand it, but it is frustrating to just have someone say, here at the extreme is one point of view that you know we can't adopt, because our job is to say what is in the best interests of this this estuary, and not to pick a side and say, okay, you win, everybody else loses. So again, this may be obvious, but it is something I think that people actually need to consider when they present to us. It is not as helpful to us, given the volume of what we have to do, to put an extreme out there into the pot or the mix. It's much more helpful to say, to acknowledge, for example, multiple stressors, just to pick one issue. I mean, everybody's favorite stressor is not whatever their stressor isn't. And I understand that emotionally as well as politically, but it is actually more helpful to acknowledge the legitimate role of the stressor you represent in talking to us and saying why nonetheless here is a way for us to deal with it, taking into account what we have to do up here. It's the best way to influence a judge if you're really a good lawyer, may not impress your clients as much. It is also the best way to help us give you what you want. So I just, again, I don't mean to preach, but I figure early in these proceedings I wanted to put that out there. I know it's well-intentioned most of the time, but actually we have a very complex set of things to do, and the closer you get to putting yourself in our seats, the more likely we are to say, wow, thanks, and be able to put ourselves in that space. Just with respect to just one of the, yeah, everybody was very good on this panel, and I appreciate it a lot, and it's nice to see those of you I know, of course. But also, in talking about uncertainty and science, and this may go without saying from what other people have said, we always have to move without certainty. And anything that says in the face of uncertainty you have to spend more money and do a zillion more studies is not helpful. It may be true in a perfect world, but again, it's best to say how do you manage uncertainty within the bounds of reason, because we will not have certainty on anything in this complex system for a long time, which is again why I like adaptive management. People can focus on how to apply adaptive management in those varying time frames we talked about yesterday. I think it's most helpful. And then finally, and I don't mean to be on a soapbox, I don't really have a question today, but I obviously ate my Wheaties this morning as opposed to yesterday. The point about how to more efficiently use the resources we have, I want to thank you for, Michael, because we don't have unlimited resources, and in fact there are an incredible array of resources devoted to the Bay Delta now. I mean, we are lucky to have them, and we are lucky to have the good people we have doing them and to have the various efforts. So again, I want to thank you for focusing on how do we move towards being more effective and efficient with what we had versus just add money, which I find just add money is about as helpful as just add water as an answer. You know, this is a complex issue, and so thank you for that.
Yes, Michael.
It's hard to stop me from talking, so I apologize. But
I don't know you will, but
to
now I
Feli-
know.
Since Felicia didn't have a question, I have an answer. I guess there are 2 points I wanted to make. Steve's start of an idea would be a way to accomplish what Jim was saying. I think that it's not unreasonable for the board to come up with a series of questions and goals every year that you submit to either the IEP or the other programs of crucial scientific issues that are going to make a difference for you. I think the trouble is we often do science that's relevant. We need to focus our science to work at specific questions that will make a difference in what we decide. You were talking yesterday, Chair Spivey about triggers, and in the Mass Bay Boston Harbor case, with the Endangered Species Act finding, we developed a series of triggers that we linked to our monitoring program that then we would have to take additional action if we went above and we had a yellow, sort of a warning light and a red light as to things we would do. But ultimately, and different decisions we would make if we exceeded those things. And I think if you could get more specific, it would not be hard. We're making predictions, and they're all linked to the predictions that the different groups were making. We have the various agencies making predictions about how the Bay and Delta are going to respond to things. Let's quantify them and then check them, and then if they go one way or the other, and they don't have to be permit limits, I don't think, but they could be, hey, we're going to take different actions. So Steve's idea of each year is trying to say, what specifically are goals? That would be the easiest step to make the monitoring community and the science community closer linked, that if you annually made clear what your specific questions are. We do something like that in the RMP. This other point is on the modeling piece, we need a lead agency on modeling. The obvious choice is the Bay Delta Science Program, but we've got to do more than flow, and there's got to be one agency that's leading the modeling so that and that all the models then fit within that. We have resource issues as to how to do that, but ultimately then we should be taking anything we require people and forcing it into, they always will have a list of things they need money for, and we can say, instead of having this permit requirement or this permit requirement, is provide funding to do that. It's sort of like super mitigation for science. So if we have a science mitigation bank, I think that might be the way to do it. So
So
thank
we
you.
need to monitor the monitoring, is what you're saying.
So let's liven things up. I saw John sitting there shaking his head, turning red as Mike was talking. John, do you disagree?
Wow, what an opening for me. I don't want to incur the wrath of all the people in the room, but I think we're not addressing the issue. The idea that we can put together a better mechanism for getting feedback on how actions affect water quality conditions or fish is not the issue. That's what we were supposed to have been doing for the last 17 years. It's your job now to say how much water, where, and when. Then we can do things that see, okay, is that improving fisheries? But we've got the triggers. There, you know, a year ago there were 12 smelt left. Obviously that's a joke, but you know, the triggers have been tripped. And it's, I think your council will agree with me, you can't establish water quality objectives that say, do this, and then if something doesn't work, that's not your obligation anymore. That's not the way it works. In a perfect world, we would try to be operating the system in real time and tweak things and everything, but you have to come up with numbers. How much flow? And then people can do all sorts of research and try to give you feedback where that's good or not, but all that means is they would request you reopen the water quality control plan at some point and say, we think the science now shows that doesn't do it. But you're going to have to make that decision based on non-certainty that, in our opinion, at this time, the science supports the fact that, and I'm just making this up because I'm not an expert, X2 in fall for 15 days under these year types will be implemented. That's what you have to do. You can't say, well, let's try it a couple years, and then if the smelt population doesn't rebound, then we'll increase flows on some other river or something. You can't do that. That's not how it works. So, you know, again, that's contrary to what everybody's been saying about working together. Working together is great, and it should be done, but that doesn't give you a water quality control plan recommendation. And just because I have the mic, that's why we have resource agencies. Now, this is the first step, the workshops, right? But we need the fishery biologists from the resource agencies standing here saying, the water quality control plan from 1995 as amended doesn't work. It's not doing what it's supposed to do. We think you should do this in addition or differently. That's what they have to say. Then you get to say, I don't know if that's good. I don't know if we can do that. I don't know if this works. You know, balancing, and later comments I'll tell you about balancing. But, you know, that's what you guys do. But the fishery agencies have to be taking firm positions, which they're doing their best to not. I think we had a panel end yesterday with somebody say, I think you should look at flows. That, you know, that's, anyway. Thank you for allowing me to look bad again.
You know, John, I have to say, I like the new and improved John Herrick.
I'm very open to suggestions, as I mentioned. But, yeah, monitoring is no substitute for our job, rest assured.
And I'll put a wrap on this. What has come out to me very clearly is that there are things that we can do now completely separate from the plan. The plan, as John has clearly pointed out, is pretty focused. But there are a lot of things that we can be doing right this minute. We don't need a plan in order to do them. And certainly in this area of monitoring and data collecting, but even, you know, even other things. And so Tom Howard is in the room. One of the things I think we should, after we, and maybe this is something Brock may want to help with, we should be separating out those things that will be helpful to the Delta, but don't require that be part of the plan. Let's let poor Richard and Diane, you know, get the plan put together in as focused a way as possible. But let's not drop all these other things. And, you know, maybe there's things that we can work on now. So I appreciate all of you for being here today. And so I guess now,
It's time for a break, so we'll take a 10-minute break and come back at 10:50 by this clock, which is different than that clock, and we'll hear from the next panel. Thanks.
Yeah, yeah, good.
Done a mistake.